Hi, everyone. As you can see, we have a new background. Please let me know in the comments if you find it useful to have this sort of diagrams in the background as I answer the question of the week. So this week, I'd like to answer a question I get quite frequently, which is what is the difference between enabling teams and centers of excellence? So let me tell you, first of all, that enabling teams are possibly from the four fundamental topologies we're talking about in the book are possibly the one that generates more questions and in terms of what are the expected behaviors, what is the value that this sort of team brings to the organization, and how do we justify that value? We kind of expected this because in many organizations it's still quite unfamiliar to have experts who are teaching and facilitating and mentoring rather than executing the work themselves. And in terms of centers of excellence, it really varies a lot. I've seen examples where the teams in the center of excellence are effectively acting as enabling teams, as described in team topologies, as well as poor examples where centers of excellence are kind of ivory tower, or at least they feel like an ivory tower to the product teams, where they're being told, follow these guidelines, adopt these practices, and do things in certain ways, but kind of from a distance, right? Without the solid kind of grounding on the real work that the teams are doing. And so there are two key aspects to consider when we're talking about true enabling teams. One is the behaviors we expect from them, and the second are the metrics that we can use to identify if the work of the enabling teams is successful. So in terms of behaviors, we expect enabling teams to be spending most of the time on the ground with the product teams, with the streamline teams, pairing on examples, running workshops, mentoring, whatever it is that's going to help this specific team gain the knowledge that they're lacking. And so it's not starting from kind of an ideal view where, yes, we can create a list of good practices and recommended approaches for all the teams, but that's kind of an ideal view that is not grounded on reality many of the times. Teams are different, they have different gaps, they have different maturity, different experience. So that's the first obstacle. Just expecting all the teams to adopt the same guidelines is not realistic. And second, we need to understand that teams, they want to do their best. Most people care and they want to adopt good practices, but they're often, if not always, overloaded, right? They have their backlog, they have their roadmaps. And so we need to understand that it's not possible to just ask them to do more without having more time available for that. And so we need to understand and be very kind of precise in terms of what are the gaps that are most critical to address for this specific team right now. And so that's what characterizes enabling teams to do that sort of almost chirurgical work where we're actually addressing this specific gap. We're not kind of setting up a broad expectation on all teams to follow a certain set of guidelines. We can take an example around SRE, for example. Some teams might be very new to SRE, and they need help understanding what are service level objectives, error budgets, how do we set them up, kind of the basics, if you like, on some of the techniques, and understanding, obviously, what is the value of doing that. At the same time, other teams in other parts of the organization might be further ahead. They might have had more experience with SRE, and maybe they are already kind of needing much more technical help around kind of how do we scale our databases, for example, or any other kind of more technical aspect where they're already needing help to fine-tune some aspects of the running of their services. And so that's all around behaviors, right? And then in terms of metrics, because we're saying the enabling teams are on the ground, they know the product teams that are helping, they know exactly what are they trying to address, then we should be able to identify meaningful metrics that are concrete, that are attainable, and that are directly in line with the needs of those teams. And this is quite important also because enabling teams, they're not building something, they're not building product or features. And so we cannot and we should not try to measure enabling teams based on outputs, direct outputs from these teams. We need to measure what is the effect that they're having on the outcomes of the product teams or streamline teams. And this can be, it doesn't have to be complicated. It might be that we're helping a team, be able to deploy more frequently. So that's a good metric. And that we want them to deploy more frequently without increasing the number of failed deployments, for example. That sounds like a metric that is not too hard to measure, and that we should be able to correlate with the work that the enabling team is doing around that. And so in that sense, we should be able, for enabling teams that are on the ground helping specific streamline teams, we should be able to set up concrete metrics and see the value of the enabling teams. And so a final tip for enabling teams is to make sure that you are kind of measuring your impact and keeping track of those improvements. Because there will be times when you will need to show the value of the team, right? Why does this team exist? Especially if the organization is under some stress. And there might be more kind of skepticism around why are some of our experts not, in doing the project work or the product work. And so it will be important to have this ways to prove the value of the enabling team in these situations. So that's it for this week. We'll come back next week. Thank you very much.